everybody, and welcome back from your break. I hope that you've had very interesting and informative first sessions and are ready for the afternoon sessions, starting with this plenary on loans, interest rates, equities, grants, governance, what to consider. Now, as we're here at today's conference on Walk the Talk, we realize that often one of the challenges between getting money to move and helping investors and entrepreneurs really understand each other are exactly these issues around financial structuring, financial requirements, and how both sides can deliver the impact that they require in the structures that make sense to them. So I'm delighted to welcome our panelists today to speak to you about this topic and their insights from their own perspectives. And we will, if you are happy, we will start with Nicolas Karambadzakis from ECLOF International to talk to us about microcredit and his experience in that area, and also looking at social and impact management. So Nicolas, thank you, and over to you.
Yes, thank you, Nana. And hello out to everyone. I can't see you all in this setup right now. I can just imagine. So I'm happy to be here with you all. And I represent Aklov International. Aklov stands for Ecumenical Church Loan Fund, and that already gives a hint at the background of the organization. I'd like to say a couple of words about our journey as an organization from a grants-based to a market-based investable setup and microfinance, microcredit organization. So the Aklov is quite old. It was set up in 1946 in Geneva by people who later on founded the World Council of Churches and by Swiss philanthropic bankers. One of them actually from Lombard, Odier, in fact. Aklov made the first loans in the 1940s and 50s for rebuilding churches in Europe after the Second World War. Later on, Aklov as an organization turned to the developing world, starting in the 1960s and 70s and doing church funding, church rebuilding, church constructions, church social projects financed through loans and itself being financed through grants. Later on, this model turned away from church funding to real community development projects and more micro credit and micro loans to groups of entrepreneurs and groups of farmers in the areas where we were working. Those were and are in all three continents, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Today, the mission of Aklov is to promote social justice and human dignity through microfinance and related non-financial services. We serve in 12 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We have around 130,000 clients. The average loan is quite small, around $300. And it goes to a smallholder farmer, it goes to women entrepreneurs in urban settings, it goes to the rural trader, rural microbusiness. 7 out of 10 clients are women, 1/3 of clients are youth, 60% reside in rural areas where financing is the most needed, and 25 of them, and growing, are farmers nowadays among our client base. Now the Aklov model is quite a high touch model. That has been a problem in the pandemic, as you can imagine. We have even prior to the pandemic been introducing digitized services, mobile banking, agent banking, different models to reach our clients and to increase our outreach, particularly to the rural areas using technologies. But still, it's a high touch model where we see our clients normally on a weekly basis for group meetings, for repayments, for making disbursements of loans, etc. We will mostly use the instrument of solidarity group loans because the co-guarantee that the clients provide in those groups helps them replace the bankable collateral that they often don't have. And capacity building to our clients is a very important part of what we're doing in areas like financial literacy, good agricultural practice, turning organic, taking a smallholder farm to an organic setup, home improvement, hygiene, sanitation, women empowerment, etc. These are all things that we train our clients on, along with the loan, to enhance the social impact of the loan. As a mission-driven organization, Aklov is really focused on impact and strong social performance management practice. We are a member of the Social Performance Task Force, which is a global organization in that area. And we adhere to high standards in our own practices around social performance. We audit our institutions along these standards. We issue reports on the social performance besides the financial sustainability, financial performance, and we measure our poverty outreach. Now, relevant, I think, to the context of this event today, I'd like to describe shortly a process that Aklov has undergone in the last 10 years that has taken it from being a fully grants-dependent organization to a market-based organization, okay? So over those 10 years, both the Apex institution, Aklov International, which I represent, and our membership of 12 microfinance institutions in those countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have gone through this process of restructuring and of mainly cultural change to a market-based approach and more commercially driven approach as well. And prior to that, the relationship between the Apex and our members has been that of a donor to a grant recipient. Now, all of this has changed. We're at a more of an arm's length now. The same with our partners, our investors, who we've attracted. And we've introduced many changes to make this network of Aklov investable, in a sense, as it had been earlier ready to receive grants, to now turn into an organization that is self-sustainable, that is well-governed, and that has the capacity to deliver on what our investors expect in terms of financial sustainability. I would not say high financial returns, they're moderate, but high social impact. And we've introduced a rigid underwriting process for loans to our network from the Apex to the members. We introduced a regional structure with regional staff who would monitor the performance, who would also be responsible for this credit delivery process or for this underwriting process. We introduced formal commercial type loan contracts with the countries, and we also requested a board seat in each of these member organizations that prior we would not have had. So that gave us a lot more impact and a lot more leverage in developing these relationships within our network. Now, at the same time, as we improved this also helped us a lot develop the relationship outside. And nowadays, we're able to attract investment to the Geneva-based foundation of Aklov International for building the loan portfolio across the world and our countries, either generically or on specific themes like women empowerment, sustainable agriculture, green finance, water and sanitation, home improvement, things like that. And the money is then online to the countries from the foundation in local currency, in their local currency, to our countries after that underwriting process. And the instrument that we would use are normally quite simple, and obviously that makes it simpler and easier to build those and develop those relationships with our members, where we mostly using senior loans or some kind of sub-debt at the most complex, but normally be very simple instruments, senior loans that we give to the countries 2 to 5 years. And on the investor side, we would now use senior loans as well. So we're borrowing basically from social investors in hard currency. We have a risk fund to hedge the FX risk, and the maturities would be between 2 to 5 years. And we take smaller amounts, even $100,000 or Swiss franc up to $2.5 million. So it's quite a range there in what we will accept. And obviously, after the changes we've introduced, also our members now, the microfinance institutions in the countries, are more and better able to refinance themselves locally and even internationally in some cases. So that is also a possibility that an investor can invest in an Aklov entity itself in countries, and this has happened. And mainly that is in local currency, though. So the currency always plays a key role, and how the investor can actually hedge their exposure. And in our case, obviously, this is very attractive, making hard currency loans through the foundation that are channeled then in local currency under a rigid process to the countries and used specifically for building up the microloan portfolio. And so investors can really see the impact that their money has there on the ground. And our investors are basically churches in the north and in the south of the world. For instance, Swiss church, British church, Jamaican church, or Filipino churches. There are also church-related organizations like the Council for World Mission or Catholic orders from the United States. And there are some non-Christian or non-faith-based social impact investors like Calvert Impact Capital from the United States, for instance. Now, let me talk a bit about Asia. We are active in Asia, in Armenia, in Myanmar, in India, in the Philippines, and in Sri Lanka. And we will serve around 40,000 clients across Asia. We have quite some strength comparing Asia to our Latin American or African microfinance institution, for instance. They have really the strongest outreach figures, 85% women, 80% rural, 50% are farmers. So we have very strong focus in Asia on agriculture. And they also tend to have the best portfolio quality and repayment performance in their microloan portfolios compared to our other regions. Now, for example, in the Philippines, we'll have 20,000 clients, 7 out of 10 are rural. We have 240 staff serving them. And the organization has been profitable for a number of years now, prior to COVID. Aklov is considered a pioneer in the country on agricultural lending. We have a demo farm where we train clients. And as an interesting feature there, we have an investment from Filipino churches that actually, instead of putting their monies in the bank, they put it mission aligned with Aklov and have invested over $1 million now into Aklov's microfinance portfolio in their own country, in the Philippines. Another country in Myanmar is Myanmar, where we have 8,000 clients, operations profitable, very high portfolio quality. And we have also interesting model there where we run basically on a community model. We help communities develop with technical assistance, develop village books, which are kind of documents that gather the development needs in a community and then present them towards the local government for attracting funding from their local development programs into the specific village. And we also train clients on access to land rights and agriculture and things like that.
Nicolas,
yes.
So sorry, thank you so much for this fascinating introduction. And there are many, many questions that I'm sure are already coming in terms of how you've made the transition and how churches and other groups are investing and helping the growth. I would love to continue this in the Q&A session.
All right.
Thank you. I would now like to pass across to Mason Town, co-founder of Garden Impact Investments and also the vice chair of TBN Asia, to give us a sense from an impact investment perspective of what is happening and where the huge potential and opportunities are. Mason, thank you.
All right, thank you, Nana. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be, greetings. Really like to use this opportunity to share screen about a slides of what we are. So before that, I'd like to invite you to watch a short video clips. I begin to wonder what is the purpose of my life. I begin to look around and start to search what is deep inside my heart about how I want to bring impact to people's lives. I started the journey of social impact investing back in year 2013 by hoping to garner support among like-minded people that are willing to see beyond just philanthropy.
It's all about human flourishing, and it's about transferring and investing capital and investments into companies that are working with poor and marginalized communities in Southeast Asia.
It's also about leading business people to come on a journey with us. You know, go and walk the slums for a few days, look for some businesses and see if there are things that we like, and we can then help them to build and grow their businesses.
Using business to fight poverty resonates with me because it truly gives a sustainable model, but beyond a sustainable model, we understand that people need work for dignity.
I think for me, the proudest moment was seeing these organizations really growing from strength to strength. I use the example of Agape, which is a call center, and it actually employs persons who come from vulnerable backgrounds.
Garden Impact, they came at a time where we really needed their help. At the end of the day, we look at the lives that we have impacted and we are so grateful.
I was grateful that I was me.
With more people and finance and resources, we really together can make a bigger impact in the Southeast Asian region.
I see more and more millennial generation are becoming interested in social impact investing. It's about how we can use the business to transform other people's lives. We have made about 11 investments, and we hope that more and more people will embark the impact investing journey together with Garden Impact, expand the social impact investing ecosystem for the benefit of the poor and the marginalized people. So we started my social impact investing journey because of what we have seen in the Asia community. We recognize that charity and donations alone cannot transform the lives of unemployed people. They need investments, and in particular in the Asia Pac region, we see at least 1 billion young people between the age of 15 to 29 years old. And thus it means there is a strong demand for jobs creation and livelihood income opportunities. As you know, when there is a widening social disparity between the rich and the poor, it only increases the potential for social disruption in terms of economic and political instability. As you probably know, that COVID-19 has hit everyone badly, and Southeast Asia is not being immune from it. I always tell people that the COVID-19 did not break our system. It merely showed that, how broken our system is. So for us, we are a group of people, disillusioned professionals and investors willing to put in the money of our time and our talent to treasure to help to lift people up. It is not just about putting in money and walk away. It's about using our heads, our hearts, and our hands to change the lives of the people. For example, we invested in a licensed peer-to-peer crowd lending platform in Indonesia that provide affordable student loans to the healthcare professionals like nurses, midwives, or even dental assistants. Or as a result of this professional vocational certification, these graduates who were previously unemployed or were daily wage worker were able to make 3 to 4 times more salary that they made when their parents made. So as you can see, more than 70% of the beneficiaries are first in the families that go to tertiary education. And 2/3 of the borrowers are females. Another example is that we invest in a company that was transformed from a traditional plastic packaging company to use a cassava or tapioca to become biodegradable and biocompostable. This project illustrates that we can also do good and do well to the environment, not just helping the farmers to gain meaningful employment. We also invest in a affordable rapid diagnostic kit manufacturing facility in Bangkok. During the COVID-19, we received a lot of orders to manufacture low-cost but quality, affordable, rapid diagnostic kit for COVID-19. We are in the midst of exporting to Africa and India. And so that was a kind of here. So basically we invested in a prison contact center back in year 2015. And they have been profitable for the last 2 years, meaning 2019 and even 2020. I'm going to show a video that was actually made about 5 years ago, but it will actually explain the core DNA of why we are doing this.
Prisoners who come out of prison are the most difficult group of people to reintegrate back in society because nobody wants to trust them, and nobody wants to employ them, no one wants to help them.
Families may distance you, may not. Our friends will abandon you. I had in my mind, I must do something in life that my daughters can be proud of me. That's my redemption. To be in a call center for a prisoner is the most effective work there is. In the prison environment, there are no distractions. They are completely focused and hungry for more. And we tell them, you make 100 calls, you get 80 to 90% reject calls. But do you know that you have actually led perseverance? In times when customers call them and scold them, they will not react because they value their jobs and they have that skill of patience.
Here's a guy who has been transformed himself, having been through what he's been through, and now has a vision to go and build a business that can help others along the same journey and give them a second, third, fourth chance. So for us, at the end of the day, we are wholeheartedly behind the vision. The key question was, is this the right person? And has he got the ability to execute to the plan?
So when he was released, it took him about 2 to 3 years before he called upon me, because his words were, I really feel that I should make amends with you. And he shared with me what he's doing, and he says, but finally I feel I'm proud of what I'm doing, and I'm proud that shook me. And I said, yes, this person is really changed. How do I honor my investors? I honor them by giving them the results as required. How do I honor my staff? I acknowledge them. I'm their servant as well. I need to meet them at their level. It doesn't have to be in a boardroom. It can be through our daily existence of life, in the little things that we do. I honor even the inmates I work in the prison. I go down there, I shake hands with everyone every time that I go in there. I acknowledge them. In the morning, sometimes when I have a birthday of an inmate, I will call him personally to wish him, because he's planting his road to the future.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Mason, thank you so much for the fascinating story of what motivated you and the work that is happening through the investments in Singapore and beyond. And we look forward to asking more and learning more in the Q&A session later. We move now to Michael Ebba from Lombard Odier Private Bank. And we thank you very much for stepping in at this short notice. And we look forward to hearing about impact investment from a private banking perspective. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nana, and thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. So I thought, as a way of sort of talking about this really important topic about impact investing and what can we do as investors in a private bank context, with a focus on Asia, I'd start. I generally talk about climate mitigation, and I'll start by giving a bit of a broad overview of, what is happening today in terms of climate mitigation in Asia, in key Asian economies, and then talk to you a little bit more about what we do as investors and the tools that we've developed to think about climate transition, climate mitigation, and adaptation as investors. So as of today, really Asian economies face actually quite different climate transition risks. We can also talk about physical risks. Obviously, there's some really key issues there. For Asian economies, with a lot of cities, for instance, exposed to coastal floods and so on. But really, so also think it's important to talk about climate mitigation opportunities as investors. So it's not just about the risk portion, but it's also about the opportunity set. So according to the latest estimates from Climate Action Tracker, Japan and China, for instance, still on a decarbonization trajectory that is rated as highly insufficient. On the other hand, for instance, India is actually standing out as an emerging economy that shows fairly encouraging signs and could be aligned with, for instance, the objectives of the Paris Agreement, should it find a way to transition away from coal-based energy. And typically in the context of India, such a transition would have not only non-negligible positive impacts for the Indian economy, but of course also for its population as a whole. Thinking about the interlinkages that we see throughout these problems of, climate change translating into, of course, social challenges. Now, in Japan, which I just said is rated as typically highly insufficient by Climate Action Tracker. So in response to the COVID-19 crisis, the Japanese government has included really a few measures that could be considered as part of a green recovery package. The major policies that we note as of today are a revision of the country's nationally determined contributions, which will be submitted before COP26, which we hope will happen in Glasgow in 2021, and also a revision of its basic energy plan, which includes a plan to retire most of its coal-fired power plants by 2030, and also a restriction of financial flows for core power overseas, only to countries that are committed to long-term decarbonization. Now, this latter objective is somewhat contradictory in a sense, considering that most countries that have credible decarbonization plans tend to also try and phase out coal themselves. And this is, of course, interesting for economies such as China and India as well. So in China, President Xi Jinping has announced late last year that China would aim to see its emissions to peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060, which of course in a global context is extremely exciting news, seeing that level of realignment from major economies, obviously also with the new administration, Joe Biden in the US, you're starting to see really major forces pulling all together in the right direction. Now in China, the government has issued broader stimulus packages on the back of COVID-19 to double down on existing priorities, to transition industries as well as its labor force towards a modernized digital economy, rather than restarting traditional infrastructure strategy. However, we see still some carbon-intensive sectors that essentially require high energy from fossil fuels in particular, that are still not really quite phased out at a pace that we would hope it would. China coal activities in particular remain a large concern and remain largely inconsistent with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. It would need to essentially phase out coal before 2040 under 1.5 degrees temperature increase pathways. But it appears it is essentially going in the opposite direction. So after lifting a previous construction ban on new coal plants in 2018, China has, for instance, rolled back policies restricting new coal plant permitting. And finally, in India, before I touched on how we approach these questions of Paris alignment as an investor. So really in India, the economic slowdown, especially on the back of the pandemic, is leading a sharp reduction in emissions in the short term, something that we've observed in other economies, but they're actually likely to restart increasing again to their previous rate unless India develops a focused green COVID-19 recovery strategy. And of course, it has a very large stimulus package of about 10% of GDP. And so this crisis could potentially present a very interesting opportunity for India to accelerate the transition away from coal to renewable energy. And so maybe now so that kind of sets the stage in how we think about generally economies and particular industries within economies as well as investors. So essentially, worldwide governments and industries are establishing those emissions reduction targets that are very often aligned with this objective of restricting global warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, the objectives of the Paris set out in the Paris Agreement. Now, interestingly, as investors, without a way of anticipating the future carbon intensity of their investments, investors are effectively flying blind through necessary structural change in the economy. And so at Lombard, what we've done is to work to develop what we call the Lombard Odier Portfolio Temperature Alignment Tool, LOPTA for short, to enable our clients to invest with foresight throughout the climate transition and support the objectives of the Paris Agreement. LOPTA essentially offers investors a clear view of the risks and the opportunities inherent in the climate transition and enables clients to focus on companies that are aligned with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And so ultimately that allows investors to build portfolios with an overall temperature trajectory that is part of the net zero solution. Now, how does that work? So basically, so far the market has been really focused on the notion of carbon footprint, which of course is incredibly important, but carbon footprint tells you something that is historical. It tells a story about how much carbon a given company, a given industry, a given economy, as I was talking about earlier, is actually producing as of today or as of last year. Now, when we think about climate mitigation, what's essentially really important is how emissions are trending over the course of the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And that's precisely why we see countries making those nationally determined contributions with objectives over the course of the next 20 to 30 years to reach potentially net zero, as I've just discussed in the case of China. So really, as an investor, what you want to understand is not only the carbon footprint of a company, but also its temperature. What is the implied temperature rise of that investment? And that's what we've developed with LOPTA. So it allows us to essentially direct investment capital towards those carbon intensive, but actually Paris-aligned companies that are critical to the economy as well as the climate transition. And we define these businesses as ice cubes. Now, ice cubes, we think, are typically really kind of misinterpreted by many climate-focused funds as high-risk laggards because they have those high current levels of emissions. But actually, a number of these businesses operate in emission-intensive sectors, such as energy, utilities, construction materials, and so on, where really decarbonization progress is vital to achieving the net zero economy. They're basically hard to abate sectors. We can't quite do without them. And what we really need is for them to transition to business models that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And so this is exactly what LOPTA allows us to do, is identify those high carbon footprint, but Paris-aligned investments. And on the other hand, actually identify and try to avoid what we call burning logs, the flip side of those ice cubes, which are companies with very high footprint, but also very high implied temperature. Essentially, the biggest sort of problem companies when we think about climate change, but also the biggest problem companies if you think from an investor perspective, because of the transition risk that you'd be exposed to if you are to be invested in such companies. So practically now we use LOPTA to measure individual companies' alignment with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. We can use LOPTA to decarbonize entire investment portfolios, really drill down into a deep understanding of what is contributing to a portfolio having a higher temperature and how we can address that through asset allocation in individual companies, how we can address this question of alignment from an investor perspective. And of course, we also can use that for reporting purposes. We also have launched recently a climate transition fund. So this climate transition strategy, which was launched in March 2020, invests in companies leading the transition to net zero emissions, as well as a climate resilient economy. And there's this resilience piece that I won't get a chance to talk about, but would be very interested in talking about through the Q&A if that's of interest to you. But really sort of thinking about, how companies can function well in a carbon constrained as well as a carbon damaged world. So thinking about companies active in carbon capture, providing flood defenses, traditional transportation companies that are on a transition journey as well. And so in so doing, this climate transition fund essentially fills a crucial gap in the market that existing clean tech as well as low carbon strategies have not quite yet filled. And we're back to this fundamental question of thinking about transition beyond current footprints. But I'll leave it to that for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael, for giving us this climate context. We're talking about the tools and the fund, and it'd be great to hear more about the client reactions to what you're offering, perhaps during the Q&A. And then we pass over to our last speaker for this panel, Nicolas Niggli, Deputy General Secretary of Economic Development for the State of Geneva, to talk about the Building Bridges initiative and specifically Asian investment bridges. Nicolas, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nana. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you so much for having me, and delighted to be part of this conference. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to humbly add to all of those speakers who came before me to address Asia, a most important continent given its size, weight, and obviously vibrant diversity. The last 15 months have been very special indeed. Communities in our environment suffered from extreme weather episodes, but then came the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had such a profound effect on communities all over the world. And the weaknesses, frankly, of our systems have been spectacularly exposed, and the interdependencies of our lives have become more obvious than ever before. But as the adage really goes, there is an opportunity in every crisis. And it seems to me that the great challenges we are facing can't be tackled if we are fighting back separately, individually, with our own organizational business and investment models in mind. And so the question to me really is, to Geneva really is, is humanity going to focus on profit, solely profit, once again, or are we going to scale up sort of purpose-driven and positive impact? Do we want to be the best in the world, or do we want to be the best for the world? Are we going to talk, or are we going to walk the talk? In my opinion, we definitely need a change of paradigm. And as I say pretty often, and I sound here a bit like a broken record, we need P power 7. We need, in the future, public-private partnerships for people, planet, purpose, and profit. If we align all of this, we can succeed. Christoph Stuckelberger, in his brilliant introduction of this conference, suggested we should walk the talk. I can't agree more, but I would humbly suggest we replace walking by running the talk in order to boost the transformation of finance and the creation of innovation partnerships. We have no time left. We really need to transition from this present way of organizing and of doing business into new paradigm. And so we have to have that exponential capacity to move forward. And to illustrate that, to be very concrete about what we've been doing to help here in Geneva, I would like to give you insight into, very brief insights into 3 transformative projects we have initiated recently here. The first one related to finance, we just spoke about it before. To introduce the first one, I'd like to cite the Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the new Director General of the WTO, first African woman leading the organization. She once reminded me of that old Nigerian proverb: in the moment of crisis, the wise do build bridges and the fools do build dams. The first building bridges process we have generated here, and that's the first example I'd like to bring to this table today, is called indeed Building Bridges Week. And it links global governance and SDG implementation with the financial world, with sustainable finance, SDG financing. And we started this in 2019, 1 week, a summit, more than 30 different events, bringing people together, building these bridges between the finance community and global governance to accelerate the SDG implementation. All of the major sustainable finance centers of the world were represented here in Geneva, and we started to create those dialogues, to work together to lift all of those boats. We started with finance and global governance, but this has now to enlarge. We can't just build sectorally in such a project. So we need everybody on the deck. And this is leading me to announce here that we are in the process of preparing a Building Bridges edition 2021. We were supposed to have one in 2020, but COVID has sort of like had a bit of a say on how we implement that plan. So it's going to be 2021, probably the end of November. An announcement should be made soon. And we have just heard before from Michael Urban from Lombard Odier. Lombard Odier is very heavily involved in this exercise at the level of the lead associate, Patrick Odier, who is chairing the Building Bridges Week. So I anticipate for 2021 a much larger group of stakeholders present. Asset owners should obviously be key. And I know full well here how important faith-related investment is out of Asia, especially, and how much of a role it can play. So my message here to the whole community is really, I hope we can get you all involved here in 2021 to keep on building these bridges. Now, the second initiative I'd like to very briefly talk about has to deal with trust. And to introduce it, I'd like to refer to Lao Tzu, a great Asian thinker. Lao Tzu once said, "He who does not trust enough will not be trusted." Trust is an essential ingredient in all human relations. But digitization, which has experienced a radical acceleration in the last 12 months because of the pandemic, carries many positive externalities, but also allows us to foresee a whole series of relatively negative consequences, potentially more harmful as they develop. And whether we talk here about cybercrime or cyber warfare, the spread of hatred, they all really lead to a breakdown in trust online as well as in our physical world. And in this context, to us, we felt it's very urgent to agree on the terms of a new contract between humanity and the technosphere. And we feel this wherever we have conversations. And similarly, the question of resilience and the need to rethink how we entrust each other digitally is fundamental. And to make a difference, we have started creating what we have called the Trust Valley, a platform which is designed to accelerate interdisciplinary cooperation and co-petition between stakeholders. So again, civil society, could be faith organizations, government, the business world, to work all together to reinvent digital trust solutions. Faith actors, it seems to me, are key in every discussion about trust. This goes without saying. And the Trust Valley, for now, has grouped mainly cybersecurity, companies, states, actors in the field of traceability and normalization and academia. That's all very normal and predictable. But here again, I'd like to pass a message. We need a larger representation if we want to be truly impactful. So the second message to the community really is, it would be wonderful to have more faith-based actors on board of this initiative. Third and last, I'd like to very briefly talk about an initiative around data. And here I'd like to use an Indian proverb to introduce this initiative. In India, there is an old proverb saying that every dog is a tiger in its own street. We are living, as we all know, in a more and more data-driven economy. And data, while being the new oil, has also the potential to become the new tiger on the impact street, to make the link with the proverb I just cited before. But up to now, data analytics and data visualization has mostly been done for profit. And in my opinion, and that's what we feel here in Geneva, we just really need a complementary approach. We need, in other terms, to build new commons, digital commons, as suggested by Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom. And these tools must be neutral, they must be non-biased, non-for-profit, and avant-garde to empower users, all of the users, bottom up. And understanding data interconnectivity and is going to become increasingly important to make strategic decision-making, to foster more collaboration, and to fund and implement SDGs. So that's why we have created a foundation called IDE4, Information and Data Exploration for Environment, Economy and Enlightenment, to address this very specific need and for providing global governance, but also NGOs, civil society with data analytics tools that are essentially non-for-profit, hopefully to drive us forward and to make data a tiger for everyone.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me conclude very briefly. As we enter here the second 100 years of multilateral governance development, it seems to me that the coalition creation needs to grow several steps larger. We need, as the conference suggests, to walk the talk, or better said, to run the talk. We need holistic approaches rather than silos if we want to create true systems change. Cooperation at a larger scale than any time before is needed, and I firmly believe we can be on that path. We share, in my opinion, an enormous collective responsibility to take the positive avenue. We have to cross the line altogether. This is not a race. And if we succeed, we can build truly a brilliant new world for the many and not for the few. That's the message I wanted to pass this morning. I thank you so much for having given me the floor.
Nicolas, thank you very much for your message, for your call to action, your call to collaboration, and your call to making data more of a common good and creating the digital commons. Now, for us at Faith Invest, this is a fascinating conversation. I'm looking forward to the questions as well, because we really are about helping faith-based organizations to invest in alongside their values, fully aligned to their values for the good of people and planet. And the bridge between asset owner or investor and opportunities is really one that takes a lot of development. I'm going to start off with the first question here. It was directed to Nicolas, but I think I'll expand a version of it to everybody, which is just, in this world, and as you look at opportunities and investments, how do you look at risk? So the question to Nicolas was specifically around the risk and hedge fund, but I will ask everybody more broadly, how do you define risk, interpret risk? What does risk mean in the context of all of the impact opportunities that we see ahead of us? So maybe Nicolas, to start with you, and then I will extend the question.
Yes, I can just directly answer the question. I think currency risk is a key risk, obviously, in international relations and international lending, investing, and it can really make or break a deal in many cases. It can also imply high costs. Now, the solution that we have found at Aklov International is a pragmatic one, and one that is in line with our social ambitions, I would say. To start with that, we feel that it would be irresponsible to push any currency risk to our membership, that means to our member microfinance institutions, because they are fighting on the ground every day, making loans to vulnerable populations, to empower them, training them, capacitating them, and basically help them get themselves out of poverty. So they should not be the ones bearing the final risk of currency devaluation. That's something that none of us can really influence. So that is our first tenet in that regard. On the other hand, obviously, it is irresponsible for us to take up all this local currency risk, and then at the same time we have a repayment obligation towards our lenders, our investors, at the Geneva head office level, where we are taking up these loans in hard currency, mostly dollars. So what we've decided to do was quite pragmatic, because if you run with hedging facilities that are like TCX that are available internationally, then the pricing will often break the deals. It will make it simply unsustainable to hedge every single position. So what we've done is basically we have introduced a facility which we have been lucky enough to receive as a grant in the past, a long time ago, that we have ring-fenced, and we use this facility of ring-fence funding not to hedge every specific position, but we use it in the case that we have repayments in local currency coming back to the Geneva foundations, and they have the currency has devalued, and on that basis we would not be able to reimburse or to meet our repayment obligations with our hard currency lenders. In those cases, this facility will step in and make up for the difference, okay? So we don't hedge every position to countries, but we kind of overall hedge our own liability towards our investors, our lenders. And that has worked out quite well so far, and the facility is still there. It would be able to cover quite some risk. It hasn't been so dearly needed, and we still have access to it every day, and really it helps us protect us and protect our reputation in a sense, and meeting repayment in hard currency anytime. Even in the COVID crisis, I want to say that we've been able to meet all our repayment obligations to our own lenders upstream, while downstream we have been deferring a lot of due payments due to us from our membership, because obviously they don't get repayments in their own countries from their microcredit borrowers.
Actually, maybe just Nicolas briefly. So how have you been managing that gap? Because obviously that's not a situation that you can maintain for a very long time. Just quickly before I move on, I'm curious to see how you're dealing with that practically.
You mean the COVID-induced?
Yes, essentially, because you are maintaining your repayment track record, but obviously the people to whom you've lent are not in a position to do that. How are you managing that balance? Are you finding faith groups are coming in, new investors are coming in? What's been the reaction or the action?
Yes, it is interesting. We have actually executed on a new relationship and a new lender coming to Aklov International that was started prior to COVID and that went through even in the COVID context. So that is actually quite an achievement, I think, because many things have stopped, many relationships have not been built and developed. and expanded during this time. Many people have been very cautious, and we see the same. But we've had this case where we've even got fresh monies in the COVID crisis from an impact investment fund. So that is something that obviously is quite heartening. On the other side, we operate on a quite conservative basis as a Swiss-based foundation, and we have strong capital bases. And it is merely and simply that which has helped us maintain our liquidity and maintain our ability every time to meet all our repayment needs. And obviously, I must say, resources are limited. And if this goes on for very much longer, then we will be in trouble, obviously. Like I think everyone would, both in the developed and in the developing nations.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Nicolas. I mean, Mason, just your views and insights on risk, again, in this COVID situation, and as you seek to grow and reach traditionally neglected populations with opportunities and the whole youth boom, and how you cater for that.
Yes, thank you, Nana, for the question. I really thank you for the earlier speaker sharing. When the word risk is mentioned, I think we need to look at in the proper context. The context of, risk is linked to your returns. Risk is linked to your values. So, in my religion, faith is spelled as R-I-S-K. When we talk about being in a faith-based environment and you don't exercise risk, there's no faith involved. So I think, we have to live out our values of our faith. Faith is meaning that helping others. And of course, that from a very traditional banking sector, we always talk about high risk, high return, low risk, low return. And of course, again, when we do impact investing, you're not looking at pure financial return. Instead, we are prioritizing social impact returns over financial return. That does not mean we only advocating losing money proposition. We still advocate positive financial return, but it's not as crucial as social impact returns. So I think the risk depend on which stage you look at. And I like to use this juncture to talk a bit about the danger of overclimbing or over talking about risk, because there is risk, because in the sense that impact investing at least in Southeast Asia is still what I call a frontier financing. It's like very little track record, very few people are doing, not enough data to establish very objective conclusion. So this is why, all our pioneer impact investors are aware of the risk, but they are not looking at pure financial return. They are looking at generating positive social impact returns. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that social impact investing is not meant for everyone. It is really meant for those who have a heart for helping the poor, helping the vulnerable group of people. So, I may talk to 100 potential investors. In the end, only 2 will agree with me. I know it's a lot of hard work, but this is how the game is going to be. So I just stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you for that insight. That's really helpful. I mean, Michael, in your context, talking to your clients and with private banking clients, traditionally seen as incredibly conservative, just how you have those risk and return and impact conversations and how they've been evolving recently.
Yeah, thank you. I think, it's interesting. I think the conservatism is also part due to, there's a question of education and catching up in terms of how we frame notions of risk in the context of investment. And so I was talking earlier about transition risk specifically for climate mitigation. And that's one thing, right? This notion of pure financial risks is also something where, and this is really our belief, is once you start building those forward-looking measures of risks, like implied temperature, for instance, you can get into a conversation about climate mitigation and how, for instance, transition risks are actually very much material for investors. And that in some ways, because of a lack of understanding, a lack of analytical tools potentially as well, the market is not quite pricing yet. So transition risk, for instance, if you take a company that we would put as a 3-degree company, this is typically a company that we would think is actually very probably facing more stringent operating circumstances, potential loss of competitiveness, restricted growth prospects, and asset stranding. And all of these would actually have a negative impact on future profitability. Now, that's the profit outlook on it. But there's, of course, as well, the question of switching from a 3-degree company, for instance, to a 2-degree company is also impactful and material in terms of climate change mitigation. And that's, of course, fundamentally important. So this is really, I think, an example of where you can really make that link in a way that's I think, quite powerful. And then, so that's for the climate mitigation risk piece. And then, of course, there's the physical risk question as well, right? So how can you, with foresight as an investor, think about exposure to particular hazards, which are more often than not climate related, such as wildfires, heat waves, floods. And this is something that we're actively working on as well, developing a tool that gives us asset level insights about the exposure of companies at an asset level to those hazards and how we can manage those risks. I'll pause here.
Thank you, Michael. Maybe Nicolas, also just from your perspective, obviously you're working in a different context, but when people put the question of risk, how do you respond?
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental conversation, and we don't speak clearly enough collectively about the risk. And to me, if you ask me, Nana, what the risk is, the main risk is really not to be bold enough at the present juncture. It's essentially the risk is to keep innovating at the very margin. The risk is not to learn enough from the present crisis, especially in terms of resilience. The risk is not to shoot for systems change. The risk is to essentially not recognize that we are in a to be or not to be moment collectively, that nobody can essentially win it all alone. And in terms of finance, because I work a lot around the transformation of finance and how we essentially shift this whole sector to be helpful towards implementing the SDG and accompanying the business model changes that need to happen. Very clearly, the risk is not to embrace that opportunity strongly enough. And then perhaps last but not least, we have an enormous amount of conversations around ESG and ESG funds. To me, I think it's about really moving at least 1 or 2 steps further, as the previous speaker just sort of hinted to, especially this idea of measurement of positive and external externalities needs to move so much more forward so that we can properly calculate this and possibly make it also something tradable. That will be a game changer. So here we go, a huge opportunity, but we have to recognize it and to embrace the change.
Thank you, Nicolas. We have a question here actually from Martin Palmer, who's our CEO here at Faith Invest, who says, Mason, he very much liked your quote, spelling faith as risk. But the question is, how do you balance faith as a risk with a person's faith that they're investing well for their future, for their pensions, for their necessities, if you like?
Thank you for the question. Impact investing, like I mentioned earlier, is a very frontier finance. There is not enough track record. Yes, so from that perspective, it is considered as high risk. But remember, our investments approach will demonstrate what is our legacy like. So for example, I have seen casinos claiming to be doing impact investing because they give jobs to the poor. I mean, that make me think very hard. Is that the way you want to tell your future generation investing in casinos or the negative screening is the right thing to do? As long as you generate profit, as long as you use part of your dividends to finance the charity,
I mean, then we have to ask our question ourselves, what is our faith values? You know, I mean, that is why I say, you know, the legacy training, you know, like now you see companies are moving away from co-financing, from, you know, banks are taking the bold move of stop refinancing co-finance power plants, you know, projects that hurt the environmental. But, you know, all these are high lucrative projects, yet they still drop it because they know they have to do something. Like what, you know, the rest of the panelists mentioned, it requires a paradigm shift thinking, not just, you know, move one step at a time. We need to change probably 180 degrees, if not 90 degrees. You know, I mean, we need to embrace what we believe. You know, if you don't practice what we believe, you know, it's just talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Everyone, it has been a very fascinating and interesting discussion and lots of food for thought in terms of how to approach the whole concept of impact investing, how to keep attracting money even in times of challenge, how to help people to understand the risk that they are undertaking, and how to be bold in terms of our ambitions. I would invite each of our panelists just to share 1 or 2 sentences in terms of encouragement or insights or wisdom as we close this panel. And Nicolas, I will start with you if you're happy to start.
Well, thank you, Nana. I think I just want to conclude by saying it's a COVID crisis. We're all affected. We're all in the same boat here as people. And we feel that going forward, this area of impact investment will need more attention globally and in the investment community. We've heard from some of our speakers that this attention is already there. Mason has said that the young generation is already much more inclined to put their money where their mouth is, rather than just put it in the most lucrative, commercially lucrative or return bringing investment opportunities. So I think this is important, and it will be even more important to attract these funds, because we see now after the COVID crisis, or let's say as we hopefully move out of the COVID crisis, that the demand for this type of investment and this type of funding is growing exponentially. More people have actually been put into poverty by the crisis than before. So I think that impact investment will see much more need in the future. And I hope that this community here will advocate for this and actively participate in this movement.
Mason.
Thank you. I'd just like to encourage everyone to, especially for those in Southeast Asia, we are living in a multi-faith environment, that there are many opportunities for interfaith collaboration in terms of helping the poor, especially you know, due to the COVID-19 impact. You know, we should explore further collaboration. But I think more importantly is our investment approach. We need to shift away from a pure shareholder capitalism, which has been dominated by greed, into what I call a stakeholder capitalism, which means that people, planet, and profit. We need to make a balanced ecosystem, and that, you know, requires taking risk, meaning moving away from the traditional finance thinking. That's also taking a risk. But you know what? Take one step at a time. You know, you just impact one life at a time. You know, you will slowly see it being multiplication, and you know, that's how my journey has been. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mason. Michael?
Yeah, I think as a last point, I'll echo what Nicolas Niggli said earlier about ESG and make a broader point about this, because I think really what's essential at this point is that we need to understand that the transition is something that needs to happen in the future, and we need adequate tools to capture something that's forward-looking, about intention, that's looking forward. And ESG so far, which has really dominated this space of sustainable investing as far as the mainstream piece is concerned, has really been about business practices, how business function. And we think that it's really, really essential that we move from this notion of business practices, important, of course, to a more fundamental question of business models, what it is that business actually do and how this what is aligned with the transition that we so fundamentally need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nicolas?
Thank you so much, Nana. I like you asked us to sort of think about a phrase and challenged us a bit, which is brilliant. It sort of brought me back for a second. I don't know why. I guess it's probably because we focus on Asia. It brought me back to a formidable trek I did once about 15 years ago through the Himalayas on foot. About a month of walking and stopping in monasteries to talk with the monks. And one of them on an evening after a very long day of walking told me, you know, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way, a classic formula in Buddhism. And I think we just have to embrace the challenges that are in front of us and sort of like be happy to move forward together. If we can do it together, if we can mobilize logos, but also pathos and ethos, if we can do it with sincerity, with openness, we can create a great collaborative ventures. We have this capacity, if we work together, to create what I would call a collective intelligence factory. Every one of us in the world has potential, has the capacity to do great things on its own, but it's only if we do it together, collectively, that we truly can transcend what the issues are. So let's do it. Let's create what I would call an international innovation for good campus, and by doing so, we can essentially make sure we make the world great again.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you also to the audience for listening. I mean, the point about collaboration and interfaith possibilities is very interesting, as that is the subject of our next panel. So I encourage you all to listen to that as well and to learn what is happening in other faiths and how that can encourage us all in our journeys. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.